Welcome back to the deep dive. So, today we're doing something, well, a little different. We're looking at a figure who, for most of us, is just sort of, I don't know, a piece of furniture in the house of history.
Right, he's just there. A name you know.
Exactly. You know the name, you absolutely know the music. I mean, if you've ever watched a British coronation, or gone to a wedding, or even just walked through a shopping mall in December, you have heard George Frideric Handel.
Oh, for sure.
But the stack of research you've brought to the table today it's wild. It suggests that our image of him, this sort of heavy, wig-wearing, stuffy composer, is completely wrong.
It is entirely the wrong angle. We tend to think of Handel as this, this marble bust sitting in Westminster Abbey, the grand old man of British music. But the reality we find in these sources is it's closer to an action movie. Seriously, we are talking about an international superstar who was navigating extremely dangerous royal politics, who survived literal sword duels.
Literal sword duels.
And who operated as a high-stakes entrepreneur in one of the most volatile financial markets in history.
That's the part that really got me. I was reading through the notes on his business dealings, and, I mean, this wasn't a guy just sitting in a room waiting for a patron to hand him a bag of gold.
Not at all. He was in the trenches.
He was inventing entire genres of music just to keep his company solvent. It's this incredible story about a barber surgeon's son from Germany who essentially hustled his way into becoming the voice of the British Empire.
And that's really the mission for today. We need to bridge that gap between the Hallelujah chorus that everyone knows and the man who actually wrote it. A man who was, in so many ways, the first modern freelance musician.
A true trailblazer.
And to really understand how unlikely his rise was, we have to look at where he started because, I mean, the odds were stacked against him from day one.
Right. Let's go back to the beginning, 1685. Which is, just a banner year for music history.
An unbelievable year.
You have Johann Sebastian Bach, Domenico Scarlatti, and Handel all born within months of each other. It's insane. But Handel's situation in Halle, Germany was unique.
Very different from Bach's, for instance.
Yeah, his father, George Handel, wasn't exactly a young, aspiring artist himself. He was 63 years old when Handel was born.
63. I mean, in the 17th century, that's ancient. And George Handel was this formidable figure. He was an eminent barber surgeon serving the court of Saxe-Weissenfels.
Yeah, we should probably clarify that term, barber surgeon.
Yes, we shouldn't let the title barber fool us. In that era, this was a serious medical professional. He performed surgeries, he managed wounds, he held a really respectable, if somewhat, rigid social standing.
He was a self-made man.
Absolutely, and very conservative, very focused on social mobility for his son.
And according to the biography by John Mainwaring, which is one of our primary sources here, the father had a very, very specific vision for his son's social mobility.
He did.
And that vision was lawyer.
Exactly. Law was respectable. Law was stable. Music, in the eyes of George Handel, was, well, it was a frivolous distraction.
A hobby at best.
At best. But more likely a service role, essentially a servant's job. And he wanted better for his son. Mainwaring actually uses the word alarmed to describe the father's reaction to Handel's early interest in music.
So it wasn't just gentle discouragement.
Oh, no. He didn't just discourage it. He actively tried to suppress it. He banned all instruments from the house. Wouldn't even let the boy visit neighbors who had them.
This sets up one of the most famous stories in music history, the legend of the attic. I've seen this debated. Some say it's a bit of romantic fiction.
Right.
Others swear by it. But the story goes that Handel, as a little boy, somehow managed to smuggle a clavichord or a spinet up into the attic.
So he could practice while the family slept.
That's the story.
And it's one of those tales that, even if it's a little exaggerated, it speaks to a fundamental truth about his character, his drive.
Okay, so what's a clavichord like?
A clavichord is a very, very quiet instrument. It doesn't pluck the string like a harpsichord does. It strikes it with a little metal tangent, so it's barely audible behind a closed door.
So it was the perfect stealth instrument.
It was.
Yeah.
So the image of this, 7-year-old boy in a freezing attic in the middle of the night, terrified of waking his 63-year-old father, I mean, that really illustrates this obsessive drive he had.
Right.
Whether it happened exactly that way or not, we know he found a way to learn, because the next major event in his life proves he had already developed some serious skill.
This is the trip to Weissenfels. The father is going to the court on business, and the boy begs and pleads to come along.
He's maybe 7, 8 years old at this point.
And this is where the plot twists. He manages to get into the palace chapel and somehow gets onto the organ bench.
And he didn't just bang on the keys, he played. And Duke Johann Adolf, I happened to be in the chapel or somewhere nearby, and he heard this music.
And when he realized it was a child playing.
And a child who was supposedly completely untrained.
Yeah.
He was just stunned.
This interaction fascinates me because it shows the rigid social hierarchy of the time actually working in Handel's favor for once.
It's a perfect example.
The Duke calls the father over. And despite the father being this stubborn, self-made man who hates music, the dynamic shifts instantly.
Instantly.
Yeah.
You don't say no to a duke, period. The Duke told, or rather, commanded George Handel that the boy must receive musical instruction.
So he's overruled.
He essentially overruled the father's parental authority by royal decree. The father had no choice. He had to capitulate.
So the door is forced open. They go back to Halle, and they hire Friedrich Wilhelm Zadok.
Zadok.
And the notes here really emphasize that Zadok was Handel's only teacher. That seems incredibly rare for a composer of this magnitude.
It is, but if you're only going to have one, Zadok was the perfect mentor. He was the organist at the Halle Parish Church, and he was just a man of vast knowledge.
So he taught him the fundamentals.
He taught him the old-school German techniques, complex counterpoint, fugues, the really mathematical side of music. But more importantly, Zadok had a massive library. A huge collection of scores.
So that was the key.
That was the key. He introduced Handel to all these different Italian and German styles. And this is crucial. He forced him to copy scores by hand.
I want to pause on that for a second, that copying scores aspect, because in the modern world, we think of copying as, cheating or just rote work.
Right, as plagiarism.
But in the 18th century, that was the primary mode of learning, wasn't it? You're literally tracing the decisions of the master.
Precisely. It's how you absorb the DNA of the music. By writing it out, note for note, you learn how a harmony moves from here to there, how a bass line supports a melody, it gets into your bones.
You internalize the language.
Exactly. Handel later said, "I used to write like the devil in those days." He was just devouring the works of composers like Kurl and Froberger. He was building this massive mental database of musical ideas that he would access and, as we'll discuss later, borrow from for the rest of his career.
So he's getting this masterclass education. His father passes away in 1697 when Handel is 12. And interestingly, Handel actually tries to honor the old man's wish.
He does. He enrolls in the University of Halle in 1702 to study law.
But it doesn't last long.
It couldn't last.
Yeah.
The pull was just too strong. Almost immediately after enrolling, he takes a probationary position as the organist at the Calvinist cathedral.
So he's already moonlighting.
Oh, yeah. And this is where we see the first real spark of his ambition. Halle was a nice town, but it was small. A provincial backwater, musically. Handel knew he was destined for a bigger stage. So by 1703, he packs his bags and heads for Hamburg.
And the move to Hamburg is significant because he turned down a sure thing to do it right. I read that the king in Prussia had offered him a subsidy, a scholarship, basically.
He did.
But Handel said no.
And that is a crucial insight into his personality. That offer from the king, it came with strings attached.
Of course.
If you take the money, you become a servant to the court when you finish your studies. Handel, just like his self-made father, wanted independence. He did not want to be a liveried servant taking orders.
He wanted to be his own boss.
Exactly. And Hamburg was a free city. It had a public opera house, the Gänsemarkt Opera, which was run like a commercial enterprise. It was the place to be if you wanted to make it on your own terms.
So he gets to Hamburg, takes a job in the violin section, and eventually moves to the harpsichord. And this is where we get the story that completely destroys the stuffy composer stereotype. The duel.
The duel.
This sounds like something straight out of The Three Musketeers.
It really does. So Handel befriends this guy, Johann Mattheson, who is a brilliant, talented, and, well, a somewhat arrogant fellow composer and singer.
A meeting of egos.
Oh, absolutely. They were best friends, but also fierce rivals. So in 1704, Mattheson premieres his new opera, Cleopatra. And Mattheson himself was singing the lead male role of Antony. Now, in the script, Antony, he commits suicide fairly early in the opera.
Right, so the star singer is dead on stage with half the opera still left to go.
Correct. So Matheson's habit was to die on stage, run backstage, change his clothes, and then come into the orchestra pit to conduct the rest of the show from the harpsichord. It was his big moment of glory.
I can see where this is going.
But on this particular night, Handel was sitting at the harpsichord.
And Handel wasn't moving.
Not an inch. You can just imagine the scene. The audience is watching, the music is still playing, and these two young geniuses are hissing at each other in the pit. Matheson tries to shove him. Handel pushes back. The opera finishes, but the fight doesn't.
So they take it outside.
They stormed out into the Gensmarkt, the market square, surrounded by onlookers from the opera house, and they drew swords.
And these weren't prop swords from the opera. They were trying to kill, or at least seriously maim, each other.
It was a legitimate duel to the death. Matheson lunged at Handel with a thrust that could have easily been fatal. And here is the detail that historians have marveled at for 300 years.
Okay.
Matheson's blade struck a large metal button on Handel's coat.
A coat button? You're kidding me.
A simple metal coat button. The blade either snapped or was deflected.
The entire history of Western music, I mean, Messiah, water music, hinged on a piece of haberdashery.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? If he had been wearing a different coat, or if the angle had been an inch to the left, that's it. It's all over.
That is just, it's incredible. And the fact that they reconciled afterward is just as wild.
It is. It speaks to the volatility of that artistic life. Passion, violence, and then, okay, let's get a drink.
They became friends again.
They remained correspondents for life. Matheson actually became one of Handel's first biographers. But yeah, surviving the duel was just the precursor to the next huge phase of his education. Hamburg had taught him about the theater, but to really master opera, he had to go to the source.
Did I go to Italy?
He had to go to Italy.
The Italian tour. This seems to be the rite of passage for every Northern European artist in the 18th century.
It is essential.
But for Handel, this wasn't just a vacation, was it? He went there and essentially beat the Italians at their own game.
He really did. He arrived around 1706 as this talented German organist, technically proficient, but maybe a bit dry, academic.
A bit severe.
Yeah, he traveled to Florence, Rome, Venice, Naples. And the transformation was total. He learned how to write melody. If you listen to his music from before and after his time in Italy, the difference is just sunlight. He learned how to write for the voice, how to create that lyrical flowing line that defines the bel canto style.
He soaked it all in.
And the reception he got was massive. The audience in Venice wasn't just politely clapping for his opera Agrippina. It was mania. Agrippina ran for 27 consecutive nights. That was almost unprecedented. The audience would be on their feet chanting, "Viva il caro Sassone."
Long live the dear Saxon.
Exactly. He was treated like a rock star. He was dining with cardinals, meeting the Medicis. He was the talk of the town.
There's an interesting constraint he hit in Rome, though. The notes say the Pope had banned opera.
Yes, for a time, the Papal States had a ban on public opera performances because they were seen as, immoral and decadent. So Handel pivoted, a skill he would use again and again in his career.
What did he do?
He wrote sacred music, like his famous Dixit Dominus and these dramatic cantatas. But if you listen to Dixit Dominus, it's basically an opera in disguise. It's fiery, it's dramatic, it's incredibly difficult to sing. He was flexing his muscles, showing everyone that he could bring all that operatic drama even to a church service.
So he conquers Italy. He's the dear Saxon. But he doesn't stay. In 1710, he heads to London. Well, technically, he takes a job in Hanover first.
Right.
With the Elector, George of Hanover. But he seems to spend all his time in London.
Right. He becomes Kapellmeister to the Elector, who is a very, very important figure. But Handel's eyes were on London. London was the wealthiest city in the world, the center of commerce, a place with a growing appetite for Italian opera.
So he gets a taste of it.
He went there in 1711, had a huge hit with his opera, Rinaldo, went back to Hanover briefly, and then returned to London in 1712 and just never went back.
He ghosted his employer.
Effectively, yes. He just ditched his post in Hanover. He settled in London. Queen Anne gave him a pension, and he was living the high life. But then the plot twist happens. In 1714, Queen Anne dies without an heir, and due to the Act of Settlement, the British crown passes to her nearest Protestant relative.
Who just happens to be the Elector of Hanover.
His old boss. The man he abandoned. Suddenly, the Elector of Hanover is King George I of Great Britain, and Handel is his wayward employee living it up in London.
Awkward.
Yeah.
Very awkward.
This sets up the famous water music story. I feel like this is often taught as a simple, King was mad, Handel wrote music, King was happy kind of tale.
It gets simplified, yeah.
But looking at the notes, there's more nuance to the event itself. It wasn't just a reconciliation, it was a massive public relations event for the king, wasn't it?
Absolutely. The king, this new German king, he needed to be seen by his people. He needed to project an image of magnificence. The legend says the king was furious with Handel, but modern historians think the rift probably wasn't that serious.
It makes for a better story, though.
It does. But the event on July 17, 1717 was spectacular. The king and his court boarded a royal barge at Whitehall and floated up the River Thames to Chelsea. And Handel and about 50 musicians were on a separate barge, right next to the king's.
And musically, this is where Handel shows his genius for context. You can't just play a quiet violin sonata on a river. No way. You're outdoors, there's wind, there's water lapping against the boats, there are crowds cheering on the banks. So Handel scored water music with heavy use of horns, trumpets, oboes, and bassoons instruments that carry sound over the water.
It's big outdoor music.
It's loud, it's rhythmic, and it's incredibly catchy. It was designed specifically to cut through all that ambient noise.
And it worked. The king loved it.
He loved it so much he ordered it to be played 3 times over the course of the evening, twice before supper and once after. That's hours and hours of playing.
Those musicians must have been exhausted.
Their lifts must have been falling off. But it worked. It cemented Handel's position. He was back in the inner circle.
So he has royal favor.
Yeah.
And we need to talk about the business side of things. You mentioned earlier that he was an entrepreneur. This brings us to the Royal Academy of Music.
Right.
This wasn't a conservatory for students, was it?
No. The name is very confusing to modern ears. The Royal Academy of Music, founded in 1719, was a joint stock company. It was a corporation, listed on the stock exchange, designed to produce and supply Italian opera for the London nobility.
So it's a business venture.
A high-risk one.
Yeah.
The king invested, aristocrats invested, and Handel was the musical director, the talent scout, and the main composer. He was traveling to Dresden to recruit star singers, like the famous castrato Senesino.
And this is where the story gets tangled up in the wider economics of the 18th century, because they launched this thing right in the middle of one of the biggest financial manias in history.
The South Sea Bubble.
The South Sea Bubble.
It's crucial context here. In 1720, there was this absolute frenzy of speculation surrounding the South Sea Company. Stock prices were just skyrocketing based on rumors and hype.
Everyone was getting in on it.
Everyone from the king down to the housemaids was investing, thinking they would get rich overnight. And the Royal Academy of Music, Handel's opera company, was floating on this ocean of easy money. Handel himself invested in the South Sea Company.
But unlike so many others, he didn't lose everything, right?
He was surprisingly savvy. Or maybe just lucky. He sensed the top of the market and sold his shares before the crash. He got out with a profit.
But his backers weren't so lucky.
No. His patrons, the dukes and earls who subscribed to the opera, many of them lost fortunes. When the bubble burst in late 1720, the economy contracted violently. And when people lose their money, the first thing they cut is, expensive entertainment like Italian opera.
Speaking of investments, we have to address a specific and very heavy detail in the research. It's part of the historical record regarding his finances.
Yes, it's an important and sobering point. It is. Well, it's important to be accurate about where the wealth in this period was coming from.
Right.
The research shows that Handel, like many of his wealthy patrons and investors, also invested in the Royal African Company.
And that company was?
This was not just a trading company. It was the primary British corporation involved in the transatlantic slave trade. The Duke of Chandos, who was one of Handel's biggest supporters, was a major figure in that company.
It's a difficult thing to square with the beauty of the music.
It is. It's a stark reminder that the cultural explosion of 18th century London, including the music we love, was often entangled with and funded by that economy. It grounds the story in a very harsh reality. He's a man of his time, deeply embedded in the financial machinery of London, for better and for worse.
Yes. And as the 1720s and 30s rolled on, that machinery started to grind against him. The taste for Italian opera, it started to fade.
It did. It was an imported luxury sung in a foreign language, performed by these diva and castrati stars who were paid astronomical fees. It was just unsustainable.
And the culture itself was turning against it. I love the detail in the notes about the Beggars' Opera in 1728. It wasn't just a competitor. It was a parody of everything Handel was doing.
It was a savage takedown. John Gay wrote the Beggars' Opera in English, using folk tunes and street slang that everyone knew. It mocked the high-flown, tragic, mythological style of Handel's operas. and the public absolutely loved
It
it.
was a huge hit.
A massive hit. Suddenly Handel looked like a relic. He was the establishment, and the cool kids were all going to see this satirical show about thieves and prostitutes.
To make matters worse, a rival company starts the Opera of the Nobility.
Right.
And this wasn't just friendly competition, it was personal and political. The Prince of Wales supported the rival company just to spite his father, King George II, who supported Handel.
It was a proxy war, fought with sopranos and castrati. The rival company went out and hired Farinelli, the most famous singer in Europe. Handel lost his star singers. He was hemorrhaging money.
But he kept going.
He kept writing operas works like Circe and Alcina, which we now consider masterpieces. But the business model was broken. He was losing money hand over fist. And then the stress just took its toll.
The health crisis of 1737.
It was terrifying. Handel suffered what was likely a stroke, or what they called rheumatic palsy. He temporarily lost the use of his entire right arm.
For a keyboard virtuoso and a conductor, I mean, that's the end. That's career death.
It should have been. His mind was reportedly affected for his short time as well. He was a wreck. He went to the thermal baths at Aix-la-Chapelle in Germany to try and recover.
And what happened there?
The accounts say he just sat in the scalding hot water for 3 times longer than the doctors recommended. He was just didged.
Yeah.
He willed himself back to health. He recovered his movement and he returned to London. But he came back to a brutal realization. Opera was dead. He needed a pivot. A big one.
And this is the moment of pure genius. He invents the English oratorio. Now, for listeners who might not be music majors, what exactly is the difference? Why was this the solution to his impending bankruptcy?
It's a brilliant business move, masked as an artistic one. Musically, an oratorio is very similar to an opera. It has arias, it has recitatives, a big choir. It tells a story.
Right.
But physically, it's completely different. An oratorio is performed without costumes, without sets, and without any acting. The singers just stand there in their evening clothes and sing.
So the overhead costs, they just vanish.
Exactly. No expensive silks for costumes, no set painters, no stage machinery. Gone. Furthermore, Handel switched the language from Italian to English, and the stories from classical myths to the Bible.
And that opened up a whole new market.
A huge new market. The rising middle class, who might have found Italian opera snobbish or unintelligible, loved these dramatic religious stories told in their own tongue. It was cheaper to produce, and it appealed to a much wider audience.
It's the Netflix pivot of the 18th century. He's moving from a high-cost niche cinema product to a mass-market streaming model, essentially.
That's a fantastic analogy. It's exactly that. And he started testing the waters with works like Saul in Israel and Egypt. But the absolute peak of this new genre, his masterpiece, came in 1741.
Messiah.
And the speed at which he wrote it is just baffling. It defies belief. He composed the entire score, about 2.5 hours, of incredibly complex choral and orchestral music in just 24 days.
24 days. That's almost physically impossible. That's barely enough time to just write the ink on the page, let alone think of the notes.
He was in a trance state. His servants would bring him food, and he would just leave it untouched. They'd find him weeping over the pages. He was completely consumed by it. And interestingly, he didn't premiere it in London.
Right, he took it to Dublin. What, Dublin?
He had been invited by the Duke of Devonshire to give a series of charity concerts. And this charity aspect is vital to understanding the story of Messiah. It wasn't a commercial venture in the same way his operas were. The premiere in 1742 was for the benefit of prisoners' debt relief in a local hospital.
So it had a philanthropic purpose from the very beginning.
From day one. And that connection to charity continued when he brought it back to London. It became tied to the Foundling Hospital.
Which was a home for abandoned children.
Yes. A very important early charity. Handel became a governor of the institution. He established this tradition of performing Messiah every single year in the hospital chapel to raise money. It became a high society event, but the proceeds went directly to feeding and clothing orphans. So the longevity of Messiah isn't just about the music. It's about how it was woven into the philanthropic life of London. He bequeathed a copy of the score to the hospital in his will.
That's incredible. Before we get to the end of his life, we have to talk about one specific piece of music. Zadok the priest.
The coronation anthem. The big one.
I think people hear it and just think royal grandeur, but can you break down why it works so well? What is he doing mechanically in that piece to make it so unbelievably effective?
It's a masterclass in tension and release. It starts with this long, shimmering introduction just in the strings violins, playing these rising, broken chords, arpeggios over and over again. It builds anticipation. It goes on for a long, long time. You're just waiting for something to happen.
You're holding your breath.
Exactly. And then suddenly, with no warning, the choir and the trumpets and the drums entered at full volume on this massive D major chord. Zadok the priest. It's a sonic explosion.
It's that contrast, the long, quiet whisper versus the sudden shout.
Precisely. And he wrote it for the coronation of George II in 1727. The legacy is just unmatched. It has been performed at every single British coronation since then.
Every single one.
Everyone. When you saw Charles III being crowned recently, that was Handel's music setting the scene. He literally defined the sound of British royalty.
He also defined the sound of public celebration with the music for the royal fireworks. This was 1749. The description of this event sounds like a modern rock festival.
It was massive. It was to celebrate the end of the War of the Austrian Succession. The public rehearsal alone, held in Vauxhall Gardens, attracted 12,000 people.
12,000 people for a rehearsal.
The traffic jam of carriages on London Bridge lasted for 3 hours. This shows you that by this point, Handel wasn't just a court composer anymore. He was a national icon, a celebrity. The people wanted to hear him.
But even a celebrity has to deal with critics. We should touch on the borrowing controversy again. You mentioned earlier that he copied scores as a kid. But later in life, he was lifting entire themes from other composers. Telemann, Stradella, Scarlatti. Today, we'd call the lawyers.
We would sue him into oblivion. But you have to look at it through the Baroque lens. The whole concept of intellectual property wasn't codified in the way it is now. It was viewed more as parody or, imitation as the sincerest form of flattery.
But was it just copying?
Well, the consensus among musicologists is that Handel almost always improved what he took.
Can you give us an example? How do you improve a stolen melody?
Well, he might take a perfectly nice, simple theme from a lesser-known composer like Urio, but he would add this driving, rhythmic bass line underneath it that Urio never thought of. Or he would expand the vocal harmony from 2 parts to 4 glorious parts. He would take a pencil sketch and turn it into a full-color oil painting. He just had an incredible eye for potential. He could spot a diamond in the rough and polish it until it shone.
So he was the ultimate remix artist.
That is a very fair description. He was a musical magpie with a genius for transformation.
Let's move to the final chapter. The 1750s. Handel is in his 60s. He's wealthy, he's famous, but his health fails him again. And this time, it's his eyes.
It's just tragic. By 1751, he had developed cataracts. He was losing his sight rapidly. And in a desperate attempt to save his vision, he submitted to surgery.
And the name of the surgeon is infamous in music history.
The Chevalier John Taylor. He was a traveling oculist, a self-promoter, and, well, he was essentially a charlatan. He had a terrible track record of success.
And history remembers him for a grim doubleheader.
A very grim one. He operated on Johann Sebastian Bach, who died shortly after the botched surgery, and he operated on Handel.
He blinded both of the greatest composers of the entire era.
Effectively, yes. The surgery failed spectacularly. Handel went completely blind by 1752.
The image of him in those last years is very moving, though. He didn't just retire, he kept performing.
He did. He would be led to the organ during the performances of his oratorios, and he would improvise these incredible organ concertos between the acts, entirely from memory and feel. The audience would watch this old blind man who they knew had been this fiery duelist and opera impresario just navigating the keys by touch.
That must have been incredibly emotional.
It was. The public revered him. They saw him as this heroic, tragic figure who refused to be silenced.
He died in 1759 on Holy Saturday.
Age 74. And the funeral was a state affair. He was buried in Westminster Abbey in Poets' Corner, an honor reserved for the greatest figures in British culture. 3,000 people attended.
It brings us back to that quote from Beethoven. When the next generation of geniuses looked back at Handel, what did they see?
They saw a giant. Beethoven, who was never one to hand out compliments, said of Handel, "He's the master of us all. I would uncover my head and kneel before his tomb." And Mozart, he reorchestrated Messiah not to fix it, but because he wanted to get inside it and understand how it worked. Haydn wept when he heard the Hallelujah chorus for the first time and just said, "He is the master of us all." They knew.
So bringing this all together, we started with the question of how a barber surgeon's son from a small German town became the musical voice of Britain. What's the big takeaway here? Because it feels like his success wasn't just about raw musical talent.
No, it wasn't. The talent was the foundation, obviously. But the real takeaway is his adaptability, his resilience. Handel was the first great musician to really understand the market.
The business of music.
Exactly. When the old patronage system was too restrictive, he went freelance. When the tastes of the aristocracy changed and Italian opera failed, he invented the English oratorio for a new middle-class audience. He bridged that gap between the private entertainment of kings and the public concert hall as we know it today. He basically created the model for the modern, independent artist.
And there is that final irony we touched on in the beginning, the identity of his music.
It is the ultimate irony, isn't it? The music that feels most quintessentially British, the music that crowns their kings and queens, that celebrates their military victories, was written by a German immigrant who made his name writing Italian operas.
It's a true melting pot.
It proves that great art doesn't really have a passport. Handel absorbed the German counterpoint, the Italian melody, and the English choral tradition, and he synthesized them all into something new, something powerful, and something universal.
That is a fantastic place to leave it. The man who dodged a sword, survived a financial crash, and gave the world its most famous chorus.
An absolutely incredible life.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. I think I'm going to go listen to water music and just appreciate the fact that I'm not on a barge in the pouring rain trying to play a French horn.
A very wise choice.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.